Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you for coming on today. You're going to talk about um, lighting design and its future in, I guess, this, dare I say it, post-COVID world,
Well,
post-COVID
let's hope.
industry, and also post-EU uh, world. Two
Yeah.
massive subjects, and it's really, really unfair to ask you about them, but I'm going to anyway. But first of all, tell us who you are, because obviously we know each other, but if anybody doesn't know you, who are you?
Who am I? So I'm Rob, and I'm like a lightaholic. I guess that's how you do that introduction, isn't it? I do lighting for shows. I mainly do lighting for theatre shows. For a long time, well, at the moment, I don't do anything, obviously, like the rest of us. Lighting for theatre shows. I grew up in the National Youth Theatre, which is sort of where I did my learning. I went and did a proper degree because my parents said I had to. I then sort of ran away to the circus with some of the people I'd worked for in the youth theatre, and then I just sort of kept going. So I toured the world for 2 years with a touring company, and then I fell into doing musicals, and so it went on. COVID's been really interesting because I've always juggled these sort of several hats in my so-called career. In that I fell into this thing called lighting programming, which is making the lights work for other designers. So I still do that. I really wanted to be a lighting designer, and sometimes I get to do that as well. And then I have this third hat where I write about shows for some of the trade magazines and things. And that's, to me, has always been really interesting because once you get to a certain point in lighting design, you sort of stop seeing other lighting designers do their work, because you don't get to go hang out with them. If you're an electrician, you work with lots of designers. If you're a programmer, you work with a number of designers. But lighting design is a very sort of, you're in your own world normally. I love the writing part because I sort of have given myself an excuse to go barge into other people's shows and say, tell me what you do, tell me why you're doing it. The career thing I think is interesting because I have moments where I go, if I'd concentrated on one of those hats, would I have got further, done better, been more successful, whatever, any of those things? I think I'm quite glad historically that I didn't, because I quite like the fact that I'm not in a theatre lighting a show every single day of the week. I see other designers do that and they go a bit crazy from the pressure of doing that. Right now it's great because there was a period when there were no shows happening, and I was just like, okay, then let's put the writing hat on and let's go find out, what's going on. Let's talk to the people who are stuck at home. Let's, as people are doing shows, let's go find out how they're doing it. And it turned out to be quite useful to wear several hats, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I recommend that as a career choice, but it's always useful to have a backup plan or a fallback plan, but also just something that you can do as a distraction or instead or something, I guess.
Yeah. So you also advise as well, don't you, within union bodies and trade and EU and stuff, which we're going to delve into later. You kind of have that hat sometimes.
Well, that was an accident, or I guess you could call it a righteous indignation thing, because what happened, and I forget the timescale now, but I think 3 years ago, the European Union, by accident, without any sort of intent to mess with us as an industry, entertainment lighting, said we're updating our regulations about what they call eco-design, which is the thing that tries to set targets to improve the efficiency of products. So the reason that your new washing machine is more efficient than the one from 10 years ago isn't because some altruistic manufacturer has chosen to do that. It's because the EU have said you must hit this target as part of a goal of making the world a better place. The reason that when you buy a fridge, it has that sort of A to E energy efficiency sticker on the front is an EU rule to let you as a consumer make a choice without having to go into a shop with sort of a voltmeter and try and figure out how much power the thing's actually using. And in lighting, because lighting is a really big user of power, they were trying to drive the industry to adopt more efficient light sources, which sort of means now LED. It's strange because there was a period when it meant those funny, curly, swirly, compact fluorescent light bulbs. They've gone out the window now because they're now bad. They were good, now they're bad. LED is the new good. And what happened was, there've been several iterations of this over the years, and entertainment lighting's always been a sort of exempt special case because we do some strange things. and also because we're a relatively small industry. There are 10 million light bulbs in your living rooms across the country. There aren't very many theatrical spotlights, actually. In this round, they removed that exemption because what they're always trying to do is get rid of sort of the loopholes and the way people can get around the rules. So if you've tried to buy a normal tungsten light bulb for your house in the last 10 years, you'll find that you can't, but you can buy things called rough service light bulbs, which are things that are officially designed for trains or coal mines or places where it has to survive vibration and harshness. It's the same thing. I mean, if we're honest, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
The EU eventually closed that loophole. So if you've tried to buy a new light bulb in the last 2 or 3 years, you can't, but you can buy a thing which was billed as a traffic light bulb. Because, traffic lights, this is a really silly story about going green, but in some really cold places in America, they changed all their traffic lights to be LED because it's more efficient. And then the winter came and they suddenly had a much higher incidence of people crashing into each other at road junctions. And when they went and investigated, it turned out that the tungsten light bulb, when it was warming up, would naturally defrost the front of the lens in the traffic light. LED lights wouldn't do that. So then the snow would settle, wouldn't clear itself, nobody could see the traffic lights, they'd all crash into each other. So the irony is what they had to do was then fit heaters into the traffic lights to melt this snow and ice. So now you lost all the eco gain that you made in the first place by putting LED lights in. It's green is a really hard subject when you actually start looking at it for all kinds of reasons like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, 3 years ago, it was brought to our attention that the EU were removing all the exemptions for theatre lighting, and that potentially meant we were a bit doomed in terms of the tools we use. And there were lots of people sort of trying to raise awareness of it, and it's just one of those things that I thought, I can help with this. I can, in the first instance, take all the information and distill it into a form that everybody can understand why this is a problem, which was the guide we wrote for the Association of Lighting Designers. And then I said, somebody needs to start writing the letters to the EU, and I can do that because I have this writing hat I wear. And then I got involved in the team of people, so people like Robbie Butler, who were much more like, we must make a big fuss. It's been really interesting because ultimately that moved up to a point where we got lots of industry people together. We made representations to the EU. We were allowed to go talk to them. We were asked to do what we sort of thought might happen, which is they said, we don't know, if you want these special rules, write them. So we did. That was ultimately adopted into the final regulation, which is why we're sort of generally okay. There's been 2 years of effectively dotting the I's and crossing the T's just to get the detail right. The thing that I think is most interesting about it is towards the end of that, we said, this is fine, we've sort of resolved this. But what this has flagged up is that our industry as a voice, as a collective, is relatively small, sort of sits below the radar of government in lots of ways, and has no one voice representing it. Has no organisation that has the phone number of 10 Downing Street and can say what's going on. Whereas, the car industry clearly has that, and the airline industry clearly has that. We maybe need that, because we've dealt with light bulbs, but there'll be another thing that comes along. There'll be another regulation, there'll be another emergency, there'll be another something else. And we'd arranged sort of tentatively a big day where everybody would get together. So all the high-end producers and all the people who make theatre and all the suppliers, and we'd sort of figure out if we could make a body that would do this and how that would get paid for. And for whatever reason, ultimately that didn't happen. And what you realise is right now in this COVID thing is when we should have had that body, because what we have now is all the unions making representations and all the little companies making representations and all the freelancers who've got nothing else to do setting up organisations to make representations. But they're all sort of saying the same thing over the top of each other. And what we still don't have is that one organisation that can go, hello, Downing Street, this is entertainment. Here's our problem. And I wish we'd done better at sort of encouraging that to happen. And maybe when we come out of this, now the need for it is even clearer. Maybe we'll get to have a go with that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We're going to come back to this this part of your career in a moment. So, with all that in mind, I wanted to ask you, if I was an LX designer who's about to graduate, or somebody who is younger than that and really, really passionate about lighting, they've seen it on, in their local theatre or on films or something. It's just something that they, really, really want to get involved in. But take into account that we are living where we are right now. What things are possible to be a lighting designer still, even if theatres aren't completely open right now? What are my options?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a sort of winding back slightly point, because part of what's implicit in that question isn't how do I be a lighting designer, it's how do I be effectively, let's call it a commercial lighting designer. How do I do this as the thing I do in my life? The first thing to consider is anybody can be a lighting designer. Anybody, as soon as you go into your living room and turn on the light, or you make a decision about that light versus the table light, you're making choices based on light. My kids do it now because they have little lights that can be warm or cool, and they choose the one they want to read by. We can all do it now because lots of people are selling these kind of, phone controlled color changing light bulbs that you can put in your house and you can just mess around with it. So everybody can be a lighting designer now. And if what satisfies you is that, and at the same time you can go do something else for a living, that's fine. So there's a slight distinction there. The doing the lighting design for what you want to do for your life, for your living, or whatever, it's interestingly hard right now, but and I don't have an answer, is the immediate question. What I will say is very obvious is there's a big split right now between people who sort of do theatre live events, who effectively at the moment have nothing to do. Anybody who does broadcast does lighting for camera is really busy at the moment, because people are still making videos, people are still making films, people are now taking what were live shows and filming them for streaming or whatever, and they all still need light, and in some ways they need it more, and you need to understand it better, because the camera needs light in order to work. If you don't have the light, you can't see the performance at all on the screen. So I think what you need to do is what you can usefully do is, as well as understanding what you know about light, is go out and start learning the bits you don't know about broadcast and how light works with camera and what the cameras need, and understand the broadcast side a bit more, because that will be a useful skill. That will be a thing that is in demand right now. There's a story that I heard that there's meant to be a Genesis tour now, and it's been postponed to next year, but they're rehearsing it now because the big studio space they used to rehearse those concerts in, they can't book any next year because they've all just been blanket booked by the film production companies, Netflix and all of those people. So that's a massive area of demand. Alongside that, you just need to keep doing lighting, I think, and you need to start thinking about places you can do it in ways that might attract people's interest or attention. You could sit in your living room and take 6 light bulbs and make a piece of art, or just a thing, and it's interesting. And because we all now have this amazing ability to sort of broadcast from the world to the world from our living room, you can get that out there. The thing I realize I fall in this generational gap, I guess, where I am no longer a master of the self-promotion through the Twitter and the modern means like that. But if you're of the generation that absolutely is, then absolutely do that and just make a thing. Increasingly, most of the lighting consoles have some degree of virtual lighting software in it. You can create lighting on screen virtually that you can then put out as a showcase and let people see it. And then it's just getting out there and making sure people know it's there. Because I think that what's going to happen first of all, hopefully, next year we'll go back to some kind of normal, because these vaccines will appear. Enough people will be sensible enough to realize that we all collectively need them. And we can all start getting back to normal a little bit. And if the vaccines work, then the new normal shouldn't look very different from the old normal. If you don't need to be 2 meters apart from somebody, then you can start putting lots of people back into a theatre, and things can sort of start to maybe go back to where they were before. And I'm not saying we should go back to exactly the same, and I'm not saying you can't make improvements, but I think what we've learned is broadcast is big, but watching a show made for theatre on a screen isn't the same as sitting as a communal experience with 500 or 1,000 other people. So hopefully we can get back to that. Yeah. And when we do that, you know, it becomes the same thing it always has been, which is you just need to make sure people know you're there. You just need to make sure people know you're keen and interested and want to be part of it. And you need to bring things to it. I think there'll also be a phase when we go through when there is just less money to do stuff. And I think you just need to sort of to figure out how to work with that. You know, to go, okay, I'm not going to make a big fuss about having the latest and greatest lights. I'm going to say, okay, I can do this with a biscuit tin with a light bulb in it and some 20-year-old spotlight. Yeah. Because absolutely, you can still make amazing work with that. And maybe it'll be more interesting to look at. You know, who knows?
Yeah, I guess it's the what you're saying is it's the entrepreneurial skills, isn't it? They're still required. They may be required in a different way, but they're really
it's entrepreneurial, self-promotional. Those are sort of flip sides of the same thing. You know, it's also, this is slightly hard to describe, but I guess the advantage you have coming out into the world is a sort of freedom to almost say yes to everything. You know, if you, and it's harder now than in my day because there's the loans that you've maybe taken on for the benefit of your learning. But equally, if you don't have a house and a mortgage and kids and a dog and 6 cats and all those things that you sort of require as you're going through life, in some ways you have a greater freedom just to say, okay, that looks like you seem interesting. Let me go work with you. Oh, somebody's called me and I've never heard of you before, but I'll just say yes, because the connection that comes out of that will be, you know, the connection that maybe takes me somewhere else. You don't know, but what you have is this amazing opportunity just to go out and say yes to everything and see where it takes you. And when you do something, the entrepreneurial self-promotional part is to make sure everybody you can possibly reach knows about it. You know, I've done this, come and see it. I've done this, it's interesting. I've done this. I had a good time doing it, working with these people. And just sort of, you know, it's the interesting thing about the sort of lighting is, I don't know, almost now, 1 part art, you know, creating the vision and delivering it on stage, to 2 parts the business of your life. You know, how do I earn enough money? How much money actually is that? Now it's this new sort of caveat of how do I keep myself safe? You know, if I go into a venue and everyone's not wearing masks, should I still wear a mask even though I feel a bit stupid? Because actually, if I get sick, I'm not going to be able to work for the next 2 weeks to 6 weeks. So there's some slightly new thinking in there as well. But then you know, like a business, just making sure people know what you're doing, and making sure you're telling people about it. Yeah. So it's going to be new and different, but the underlying thing I think is still the same. You know, you still have to do the work, do it to the best of your ability. The process is still the same. You know, you have to have the idea and then figure out how to deliver it. And then ideally make sure you get paid some amount of money at the end, because you have to do.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think, just to touch on that very quickly, I think the danger of the time with no money is there's going to be a real danger where everybody starts saying, you know, I want you to come and do this show, but I've only got £20. Can you do it? And the danger with our world has always been that somebody will always do it for less than you. But that's the part where you need to know how much you need to live on. And at some point you sort of have to stand up for yourself and say, I mean, almost, I think I'm worth more than that. You know, I think, or at the very base level, I need this much to eat. You know, I can't do it for that. And what I will say is that the lighting has always been this, entertainment lighting has always been this amazing, bigger community, you know, and the Association of Lighting Designers, for example, has always been very good about, if you call up and say, this producer's offering me this much money, and they'll say, oh, last week they offered somebody else twice that, you know, they are aware of it. And also generally doing the campaigning with equity and with the other producers to try and get the sort of the base fee for lighting up to a level where it's sensible. We all just collectively need to be aware and careful that we don't just get beaten back down. because that doesn't actually do any of us any
Yeah.
good in the long term. Sorry,
Yeah.
I hate it when it just becomes about money, but
No,
at some
yeah.
point
I agree. It's our job. It's okay. That's
exactly.
interesting. What you mentioned about film and television celluloid as well, because I guess ultimately, if you are a lighting designer, it's really useful that you can expand into those areas. Even just putting into the context of my work. So, I like writing and I love directing, and I've now started to teach myself how to use Final Cut Pro, Final Draft. I've been on lots of TV and movie sets, so I kind of know the difference and the nuance of the language. But that's really good because
Yeah.
if one day I end up on a set where I'm directing on camera, that's great because that consciousness is there. So I think it's really useful that you mentioned this idea of lighting is anywhere. It's everywhere, isn't it? So,
But also, I think the thing that will be different coming back is that, there used to be a demarcation that you were doing a stage show for a live eye, or you were doing a filmed show, TV, film, whatever, for a camera eye. And productions like the NT Live stuff particularly has blurred that for years, because you light it for the live eye, and then at some point you accept that the cameras are going to come in, and then you sort of adjust it a bit to try and make it look the same. I think what we're going to see a lot of right now is, particularly in the near term, if you do a show and you are brave enough to put it on stage, chances are you're going to film it anyway, because if we get shut down again, you want something that you can then do something with it. And so the distinction's gone. You'll be lighting the show and then some cameras will show up. And somebody will say, oh, now we need to make it look good on there. And I think just the learning curve is that lighting for the eye is all about the judgment that you make yourself. There is no right and there is no wrong really in lighting, as long as you're happy with the end result and everybody else in the team is. Lighting for camera, there are technicalities to it. If you get below at the simplest level, if you get below a certain lighting point, the camera won't see anything, even though your eye still can. The top light where somebody looks great, when they're in close-up will look odd because now they have like a really big bright nose. You need to make it more of a backlight so that it's about the hair and the silhouette behind them. And a lot of that is just technical stuff, and if you go back in time, the BBC used to run a course for the people who would become their cameramen and their director of photography, lighting directors, whatever they called it, and that was a several-year-long course to do that. Now, you needed more technicalities then because the cameras weren't as good, but to think you can just walk into a room with a camera and make it look good for the camera, you're wrong. And in some ways, what you need to be doing again is finding the people who are doing it now, and again doing the same thing you've always done, which is to call and say, "Can I just come and hang out? I don't want to work. I just want to come and learn, observe, ask questions." And again, we've always been really good at sort of welcoming those people and letting them learn by experiencing it. Short term, I think also that's going to be slightly different because, of course, if you're doing a big production where you formed yourself into a bubble, you're not going to be as welcoming at just letting strangers in, because the risk is too high. And I think we probably need to find ways of managing that. Or, can I come and hang out with you in your lunchtime on a Zoom call and at least ask you what you're doing, even if I can't come into the room? Might become the normal for a bit. It's just, it's not that people are being mean. It's just, it's the risk is too high because the cost of shutting down a movie is enormous.
And you
can't take the chance.
So let's move on to our last question, which is kind of related to the stuff you were speaking about in the first part, and that's the changes in the EU lighting regulations. Now, we met 2 years ago. I came to your discussion at a very prolific theatre, let's call it that. And I remember sitting in the audience going, why is there nobody here from smaller spaces? And I just didn't see them. So I then contacted you and said, hey, I can organise a little forum and I think I can get a good couple of theatres together. Do you want to do it? And that's how we met, isn't it? We did this lovely conversation where independent,
and it was great.
Independent and smaller theatres were able to ask you directly, what do I do? I've got this light from 1960. Can I use it anymore? That was kind of the thought, the thinking behind it. So now, update us. And also, update students if there's anything they need to know, do you think? Because you mentioned that maybe some things have changed, that you have absorbed some, recommendations. What's the future say 3 or 4 years? What do I need to know now?
Yeah.
It's coming down the line.
So the short mini history is the original version of the regulations basically said tungsten light bulbs banned. Then weirdly, it was like LED lighting products of a certain efficiency banned, which would have banned all the LED lights we use because they're not very efficient. By the time you have an optical thing and a lens and all the stuff that we need to shape our lights, it becomes less efficient. The regulations were really badly written about whether they meant the light source or the whole lighting fixture. Yada, yada, yada. So we went through all of that. Fundamentally, what the rule now says is there's a whole bunch of exemptions for theatre lighting. So almost any light you use, first of all, it was never going to ban using lights. It was going to ban buying new ones. So right now, anything you have, you can still use. Anything you have, for the most part, the light bulbs are still legal. Somebody, if they wanted to, could still sell them. The big exception to that is the little M16 light bulbs, which are the ones you see in the downlighters of all the roofs of all the houses and shops and hotels. And we were never, if we're honest, going to win that because they're so prevalent everywhere and they are such high energy users. You know, if you switch all those lights to LED, your energy use falls very quickly. The problem is lots of little theatres have adopted those partly for show lighting because you can just hide them anywhere, but also for things like house lights and work lights and all of that kind of stuff because they were relatively cheap to buy and cheap to run. And that is the thing that's going to have the biggest impact because it's already becoming very hard to buy those light bulbs. And I think even 2 years ago, we said you need to start looking at options to replace that. Interestingly, this has all been sort of going on in the background. The rule got passed. The EU made one change to one bit of wording that messed some stuff up from us. What it messed up was that if you want a very bright spotlight with a white LED source in the back, that wasn't going to be allowed because most LED sources, as they become bigger to get brighter, they become less efficient. And we were going to fail the efficiency test. And we've been going back to them for 2 years saying, the wording you've changed messes us up because what we're going to do now is carry on using the arc discharge light bulbs we've always used because they're exempt for another reason, but they're less efficient. So we need to get this regulation fixed so that we can encourage manufacturers to develop efficient, more efficient than the old source, not as efficient as your domestic light bulb, but still better white LED sources. And we won that fight. And that was written into a revised version of the regulation about 2 weeks ago, so middle of November. Right. And we were like, yes, finally, we're finished. It's done. We've fought the good fight. I mean, obviously there'll be another round, but for now we're all good. And then, interestingly, because the other thing that we haven't mentioned in the triumvirate of the EU versus COVID is this third thing, which is Brexit, which we've all sort of forgotten about because we've been so distracted this year. And an email appeared from the British government, from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy saying, oh, right, so this new lighting regulation, we realised because its start date got pushed back to next year, it won't be part of British law when we Brexit. So now we need to do our version of this regulation. And it's all going to be the same thing, and here's the text of it. And we discovered that what they had done is copied and pasted the EU regulation, but the previous version without fix, and they pasted that into a thing, and they write British government rule at the top. And that's the thing they're now proposing. And you're like, oh, God, we've done all this.
Yeah, you're going to have the battle again.
And to be fair, they've been very responsive. Well, we've written to them and said, because it's just, again, it's an accident of timing. If they copied and pasted it a week later, they'd have got the new version. And they're sort of accepting that ultimately they will co-opt the new version, but we still now have to go through this consultation process of saying, this got changed, here's why it got changed, here are the good valid reasons. We need to get it all in sync with Europe because the thing is nobody's going to make a special version of anything just for Britain. And hopefully, ultimately, that will happen. But it's just this thing where you sort of, you need to be on your toes all the time because otherwise something will flow past and nobody will notice it. And by the time you have noticed, it's too late because it's a rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're sort of on that. You know, the bigger problem, which again we sort of highlighted at that thing 2 years ago, is even though you're allowed to make a light bulb, are you actually going to make a light bulb? You know, because if you make a very specialist light bulb, and there are only, I don't know the numbers, say 50 theatres in the country that have that kind of light, and they only have 5 of those lights each, and they only buy a new light bulb once a year, it's probably not worth anybody's while making those light bulbs. And so the problem you're going to find is, even though legally you're allowed to sell that light bulb and buy it, there isn't actually one to buy. And so for the same reason, you know, a different driving cause, but the same end result, you need to start going, okay, we need to start a process of upgrading our stuff. You know, we need to start thinking about the future. 2 years ago, that was really hard because we said, you're going to find this stuff is expensive. You know, it's more expensive than just buying a replacement light bulb. Maybe we can go and try and encourage funding bodies or the Arts Council or somebody to give you subsidies to help with that. Right now, I think the chances of that happening are roughly zero because the government has spent so much money on everything else. You know, it's interesting though that when you look at this, the sort of the all-hailed £1.5 billion cultural recovery fund, that there were no conditions in that to say, we'll give you this money, it will help you survive, but as part of that, maybe you could start to commit to improving your environmental status. But because it was all done in such a hurry, none of that, I don't think, really happened. Yeah. So, you know, I think if you're a theatre, the message is, the cheapest option is you need to commit to what you're doing and get some money and go out and stockpile light bulbs now while you still can, particularly if you're older lighting fixtures. But that's not a forever solution. So maybe also you just need to start going, okay, we need to start saving up. And, you know, and that's an incredibly hard thing to say now, because if you can't do a performance to make money, how are you going to save up any money?
Yeah, it's also, I guess, if you don't have an in-house tech, then get a consultant in some way.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I think the suppliers do a pretty good, the good suppliers do a pretty good job of being honest about it, right, and giving you the ability to go and try. I think the thing is, you need to, before you commit to anything, you need to go look at lots of products and you need to read up, because it's easy to be dazzled. You know, it's easy for somebody to take the brightest LED light and turn it on and point it at a white wall and go, that one's brighter than that one, so obviously that one's better. What you need to do is immerse yourself in all the subtleties that you care about. You know, so at the most obvious level, when you fade the light out slowly, does it go
or does
into the magical black, which is what tungsten's always done, or does it go
LED
and then think about it, which is what the cheap LED does? You know, the best of LED is now pretty close to achieving that.
Oh, good. Right.
You know, you need to go in with the weirdest coloured Hawaiian shirt you've ever worn to see what the colour actually looks like. You know, because bad LED does a really good bad job of rendering colour. You know, rendering is one of those words that sounds very technical, but your eye will tell you almost immediately if it looks good or it looks bad. You know, my top advice has always been to go in with a fruit bowl, you know, because fruit under bad LED lighting looks terrible. Fruit under good lighting, however you want to define it, looks natural. And right, that's obvious. You know, there isn't really any scientific measurement. You know, you can quantify that. You can go in with a really expensive fancy color meter and you can identify why that's happening. But the short version is go in with a Hawaiian shirt and some fruit and go, that light makes it look nice, that light doesn't. Okay, that light costs a bit more than that one, but surely it's worth it. But not knowing that, put your hand in the light. You know, your skin is, you always have it with you. You always know what it looks like. And it's really telling, because all the subtleties, like all the bits of vein and all the bits where the blood is running through you, bad LED light will make that go really flat. Whereas good light of any kind, you'll feel alive.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the one to try and get the money to buy, I think.
That's really useful. Gosh, yeah, the interview could be longer for sure. I think I'll get you on again, and next time I want you in a Hawaiian shirt holding a fruit bowl. And you can do a masterclass.
Well, ETC, one of the manufacturers, used to use pizza, because pizza is the same thing. It's this mess of colours that
yeah,
terrible. There's some really fancy restaurants with really bad lighting, and it's really interesting because they bring out this incredibly fancy food, and it just looks like poo almost. But they haven't figured out that the problem is the lighting, you know, and that's, I think I was saying this earlier, lighting it's all powerful, and it's very easy to get a very good quick sense of what's good and what's bad.
Yeah.
But you just have to trust that. Don't let anybody tell you that the one that's brighter is the better one. You know, do that with your hand.
I think it's I've learned a lot. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your information, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.
See you soon.